Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new Sensibility podcast. This month, I will be speaking with Andrew Gibbons, who's gracefully agreed to talk to us about the subject of awareness through movement. As we did last month, we're looking to try and find a, really accessible definition that makes it easy to understand what the Feldenkrais method is, and specifically this month, what awareness through movement is. So we'll go into that in more detail as we go along. Just to give you a little bit of information or background on Andrew, he's a Feldenkrais assistant trainer in the Feldenkrais method, based in New York, has practices in Manhattan and Long Island. Been practicing the method for over 20 years. Been responsible for running is it the New York Feldenkrais Center for a number of years?
hmm
Kind of, you running that predominantly. You
I
have
was
a
the
back,
I was the creative director there for a few years.
yeah. You have a background in classical piano,
hmm
classically trained, and I think you were saying that you have taught at the hospital for special surgery.
At their
Um,
integrative care center. Yep.
so Andrew's, he's a very well-established practitioner and been involved with the method for a long time. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to him about awareness through movement. We had a very long, productive chat prior to this, and I think we have some shared interest, and I think it should be interesting for you. So, welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be here with you.
So, if we just start off with a kind of a general overview, can you explain to me, what awareness through movement is?
Yes. Awareness through movement is really the formal practice of refining coordination. Um, it has a few special distinctions about it. I think when most people hear the word movement and they hear that something is a kind of a movement practice, their mind tends to go towards what's most familiar, which is usually exercise. And the important distinction between practice like awareness through movement and exercise has to do primarily with this distinction about the threshold of effort. Um, if you're going to get the benefits of exercise, you have to cross the threshold of exertion. The benefits of exercise all lie above that threshold where you're sustaining your physical effort. Either, you're doing running or you're doing resistance training or whatever it might be. All the benefits exist above that threshold. Awareness through movement provides a space below the threshold of exertion. It doesn't mean you're not doing any effort or somehow you're not moving at all. It's just that when you slow things down, you actually can learn what's going wrong in the movement and improve its efficiency and its elegance, all the aesthetic qualities that signal to us whether the movement feels safer, clearer, better supported. They're all there below that threshold of exertion. So all of the benefits that people are usually seeking when they're trying to choose some sort of a movement practice or some sort of an intervention for a problem or they want to get better at a certain activity or a sport, most of us are reasonably convinced that we need to amp up the amount of effort, the speed of the movement, the strength. And of course, there are benefits up there. It's just that the kind of benefits you need in order to really improve your coordination, they live below that threshold. And awareness through movement is a really powerful practice that encompasses a tremendous amount of both strategy, insight, and really practice in all of the qualities and principles that help you gain those benefits. But they happen below the threshold of exertion, where your attention can actually be useful for what you're doing. So my basic definition of it is it's a formal practice about refining coordination.
Okay. I wonder if maybe you can go into a little bit more detail, like what's the benefit? You kind of mentioned it, but
Yeah.
like what's the benefit of dropping below that threshold, that exertion threshold that you mentioned? Like, so why would that be important? Why would that be interesting? And
Right.
how does that contrast with, you know, classical exercise,
Yes.
classical improvement through exercise?
That's right. I mean, and that right there is that is the central question. Everybody listening to this is saying, so what are these benefits? Because everybody is sure they know what the benefits are above the threshold of exertion in exercise because it is so well researched. Exercise is about the most well researched health practice, health phenomenon you can do. And everybody understands now the benefits of resistance training into your later years and cardiovascular training and VO2 max and all this kind of thing. So what is it that's actually below the threshold of effort that's so valuable? So the word refinement doesn't really mean anything to most people. But if you talk to them about what they're dissatisfied with about their coordination, they will talk to you generally when you meet people above a certain age where they've had enough knocks in life or they've had a few injuries or they noticed a few habits or they've had a few experiences that they go out dancing and they don't quite move as well as they used to and all this sort of thing. People can recognize a degradation in their coordination. Obviously, an injury really gets people's attention, right? And
Mm,
it's usually only through an injury that people realize, oh, I don't really know how to move to fix this problem. Or
mm,
I don't really know how to move or how to learn to understand what I'm doing. And so they go out and seek out either medical intervention or physical therapy or all the various ways that people seek help. Below the threshold of effort is really where your attention to your movement can serve you the best. And here's the reason why. There are a lot of details to coordination. Coordination is a much better word than movement. Movement is just a big umbrella term that can cover anything from capoeira and kickboxing to swimming and tai chi, right? These are all very, very different practices at very different places on the landscape of effort.
mm,
But coordination really involves the relationships in the body, moment by moment, that are providing you a sense of safety, of reversibility, of elegance or strength or support. All of these elements are really worth both understanding and studying, but they're really worth embodying better. Um, People often have the experience of my shoulder hurts, my neck feels a little stiff today. These things have to do sometimes with injuries the person has sustained, but they often also have to do with the way that they're coordinating themselves moment to moment throughout their day. And of course, this begins to point towards your habits of movement, your habits of coordination. Everybody has them. Everybody acquired the habits back in childhood before they even knew that they were acquiring any habits. And of course, most of us just establish a kind of a good enough foundation of habits. And then we just grow and we build on them as best we can, but we don't really understand them very well at all. And so awareness through movement gives you the space where even if you're 60 years old and you've never studied how to walk, you know how to walk, you know some version of how to walk, but it really puts you in the space where you can learn what the actual elements are moment to moment in walking. And it uses certain strategies and principles so that the efficiency of the movement can improve well past what you do, but without the kind of chaotic exertion that people do if they're just going to try to walk on the treadmill as their practice. They're just going to
mm,
repeat and walk and walk. The thing to understand is exercise is a performance of coordination. It's not a refinement of it. And all, if you don't believe me, go to the gym and watch. Now, of course, there are people who are athletic, who are fit, who are in shape, who can go on the treadmill and they can actually walk and pay attention and improve. Those aren't the people we're worried about. The people that we're interested in helping are the ones that really just are trying, but don't really understand the means at their disposal.
mm,
And generally speaking, below the threshold of exertion, is where you can really bind your attention to what you're doing and actually make a difference in the coordination so that you actually source the movement differently, you support it differently, you sense more clearly what you're doing. Because at
mm,
the very bottom of things, coordination is not about just making some movement. Coordination improves because the quality of sensation improves. You know, awareness through movement, if you notice the title, it's not called moving with some awareness, right? The goal is really to become more aware of how movement works
Mm.
and how to improve it. So movement is used as a context for how to actually reverse engineer your walking or your rolling or your sitting to standing or all the different patterns that we look at. But the important thing is that the context of effort is low enough so that your sensitivity to what you're doing is much higher. There's more time for your attention to actually be useful to you.
So I'd like to go into that and like sensitivity and why that's important, but you've brought up a couple of things that I'd just like to kind of go back
Yeah,
to briefly.
sure.
The first, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was, for example, if you've got a pain,
Hmm.
um, let's say that's a pain in standing or when you sit, your shoulder hurts or whatever it is. My sense is that in some way, the way that we understand those things is kind of as a static experience.
Hmm.
And it isn't necessarily clear how that relates to the dynamic experience of movement coordination.
Hmm.
So
That's right.
what,
When somebody's neck feels a little sore, they will touch the place that feels sore.
yeah.
And in terms of their first person experience of it, me too, it really feels to me like the problem is right here. And of course, there are examples where the problem is there. If you have a herniated disc and you slept wrong or whatever it might be, there can be, of course, local issues that really present the difficulty right where it is.
Mm,
But the solution is often, or not often, the solution is almost always helped by how you understand the whole body of coordination. In other words, if you think you have a neck pain, of course, and we're not talking like we're doctors here, but let's say you do have some sort of recurring neck pain,
mm,
but then you look at the person stand and you can see that their knee and their ankle are just on one side or caved in. Okay? Not against the law. Most of us are asymmetrical in one way or another. But you have to imagine the weight of the head at the top bears some relationship to the way the foot and the knee and the hip are supporting it from the bottom.
mm,
Gravity is pulling down through us all the time. It's the most strict phenomenon you can find in the environment.
mm,
Your body weight, whatever it is, if you weigh 150 pounds, that body weight is, of course, supported through the hip, through the leg, through the ankle. And if they're collapsed slightly, the body is going to change its position in space. And then your wonderful brain is going to simply take care of that and tighten things up where they need to.
mm.
But you're going to move in spite of the way your foot is organized, not because of it. And
Yeah.
so in awareness through movement, you really have an opportunity to both investigate but also resolve these conflicts that are going on in us all the time. And the truth about coordination, especially for human beings where we're upright, we are unstable as animals. And I
Mm.
don't mean that as a pejorative, like it's just like it's a negative term.
You don't mean emotionally.
I mean, we can be, of course, but physically, just in terms of the physics, we stand and walk. We're on a very small base of support, and a huge majority of our weight is up in the air.
Mm,
And this means that little things matter a lot. And also, of course, you didn't really come into the world with all of your physical, your locomotion skills, your walking, none of that was ready to go when you
mm.
came into the world.
Yeah.
It takes years for a person to establish those patterns. And people, of course, we all forget about that. We all
Mm,
get excited when we have children or we have grandchildren, nieces and nephews. You get to see the whole process again. It's very exciting.
yeah.
What will somebody say? She's walking today. She started walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, the important word is started, right?
Mm,
That people say she's walking. She's just beginning to walk. And
mm,
it's a long acquisition period.
yeah.
So when people come with aches and pains, of course, they're going to feel locally where it hurts. But the solution to understanding how your movement and coordination maintains that problem for so long, because let's face it, most of us, if you have a problem that just goes away 20 minutes later, big deal. Everybody has little aches and pains that come and go.
Mm,
But most of us are seeking help with things that are really quite long term, that we've been kind of dealing with or sometimes hiding from
mm,
for years. And you want to ask yourself, what is it that I do that maintains this pattern of compression or support? And
yeah,
how can I find a practice that doesn't just teach me to somehow locally stretch some part of myself,
yeah.
but actually teaches me the coordination that makes this thing unnecessary in the way
Mm.
I move? And that's a really exciting idea to get your hands on. And it's in awareness through movement very, very powerfully.
And I would say that that's probably the kind of perfect jumping off point to talking about sensitivity and awareness,
Yeah,
because that's the route into that solution. By knowing yourself more, by spending time getting to know the areas that you have difficulty, that's going to help with this bigger prospect of coordination, you know?
that's right.
Um,
I mean, there is a conflict going on in most of us in that what we want is a prescription. I mean, go to the internet. It is nothing but prescriptions for what you should do, right? That's what sells for the most part.
mm,
And certainly in the exercise and fitness and movement space on the internet or Instagram or any of these places, what you will see is just millions of instructors telling you what to do for your tight psoas,
yeah.
telling you what to do if your traps are tight, how to change your posture. All of these very local prescriptive ideas, many of them are very good.
Mm,
The problem is it's a very quick fix, and you're passive while you're watching all this stuff. I
mm,
don't know if you've noticed, but everybody is just hunched over looking at their looking at their phone doing this, except the ones that are at the gym and of course getting really fit.
mm,
But the problem that people face with this notion of the threshold of exertion, it really is the sensitivity to what you're doing.
mm,
In terms of the science, people hear about the science behind the Feldenkrais method. One of the really interesting pieces about neurologically, what is it neurologically that makes it possible to change your habits? Well, sensitivity is really, really important. And the problem is once you cross the threshold of effort, you get on an assault bike and you work out for 30 minutes.
mm,
The whole point is that you're exerting. Obviously, you're not meant to hurt yourself on the bike, but it does happen. Why does it happen that, 400 million incidents a year of people getting injured when they're in the gym, supposedly doing something that's helping them?
mm,
Why does that happen? Well, it happens because the environment you're in is one of effort, where you're valuing scaling up the effort.
mm,
And what you don't understand is that when you scale up the effort, neurologically, you become less sensitive to the details. Now, are there people who are very sensitive to the details at high effort? Yes, they're called Olympic athletes. Those type of people can do that sort of stuff. But
mm,
are you an Olympic athlete? Okay, well, if you're not, then you might want to understand that there's this other value below the threshold where neurologically you literally become more sensitive in a good way to small changes. And this allows you to actually compose your movements more skillfully when you're below the threshold. And this is really the gold that's in awareness through movement, is learning to compose your coordination more
mm,
skillfully and more elegantly. The problem is people always get excited and they want to just immediately scale up. They want to perform. It's a very common desire.
mm,
It's fine. You can go perform. You can apply this stuff above the threshold, but you have to learn it below the threshold.
mm,
So one of the scientific laws, or it's called the Weber-Fechner law. You can look it up. Uh, the law is essentially that neurologically, your sensitivity to a change in stimulus, your sensitivity to the change is greater when the stimulus is lower. Okay. All this means is if you're in a restaurant and the restaurant is super duper loud, and your partner's across the table from you and you're trying to talk and you can't really make out what they're saying, you're not sensitive to the changes of the words of what they're saying because the background stimulus is so high. If you
mm,
go to another restaurant, it's super quiet, it's carpeted, the walls are acoustically engineered, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly the background noise is down and you can have a calm, intelligent exchange, right? The same thing is true in muscular effort.
Mm.
It's not bad to exert. It's not bad to do strength training or to do VO2 max training. I've got an exercise bike right off camera here that I train on every day.
Mm.
And it's it's not fun. I work really, really hard on it. But the point is to know what is the value in doing that and what's in the value below the threshold.
Yeah.
In order to learn how to coordinate yourself better, you really want to understand the value of working below the threshold. That's where all the value is in
Mm.
learning coordination. Once you learn it, once you understand it, once you can actually demonstrate it to yourself, then you can scale up in the amount of effort and actually know that you're being safe. And that's the thing everybody wants, is to be able to know themselves well enough that they can feel okay exerting.
Yeah.
The worst thing about, the ignorance of this and going to exercise is that people don't really know what they're doing until they get injured.
Mm.
And this is a very, very common experience. I think we've all probably done it. So,
Yeah. And I guess it's worth highlighting that much of our physical learning is in mirroring or in copying the thing that we're taught, or there isn't that sort of kind of like self-led autonomous process of inquiry in learning movement.
that's right. That,
Um,
that's the, that's the other thing that's going on psychologically for most people, which is just tell me what to do. Just tell
yeah.
me the stretches,
Show me how to
and
do
and
it, I'll copy
show me
you.
how to do it. Or you go to an exercise class, and the teacher is doing the movement or the pattern and leading the class. And of course, the class is following. That's what you're paying them for.
Mm.
That is just one style of learning how to move, or I wouldn't really call that learning how to move. You're really just performing coordination in those kinds of classes.
Mm.
What you want is to be in a space where your own experience is really in the foreground and you have the time and space to experiment, to contrast, to compare, to reverse. All of these kind of interesting learning strategies are really richly embedded in awareness through movement.
Mm.
We list them all? Sure, but it would take a long time, right? But the strategies are there about how you reverse proximal and distal movements, which is make the difference between moving just the limb versus what's the contribution of the spine and the torso, and setting yourself up to actually experience that very clearly.
Mm.
These are the things that people simply do not take the time to do unless they're exposed to these ideas.
Yeah.
Again, if you're on the treadmill running, good for you. That's fantastic. You're already doing something great for yourself. But the next question is, how do you feel? And is that really a context where you can refine what you're doing? I think most people try to refine. Nobody's trying to hurt themselves. It's
Mm.
just a question of, are you really in the right space where that value can come really clear for you?
Yeah. So I think that for me, how it sounds is that there's like a very clear learning strategy within awareness through movement that is quite different from other forms of movement practice.
Yes,
Um, and the the I don't know necessarily the benefit, but like the end result of that is that really anyone that's doing anything can benefit from dropping down under that effort threshold, experiencing themselves, learning, sensing, and refining skill beneath that energy exertion threshold, and then go back into whatever environment they're used to using that skill with and have improvement. So
that's right. I
that's
mean,
really,
where are you most of the day?
yeah.
Most of the day, I would say 95% of the day, even if you exercise every day, most of the time you are below the threshold of exertion.
Mm.
So, how skillful are you there? Because it's very common if you go to the gym, you can watch people, they go to the machine, they're very aware of their form, right? Because they're going to have 150 pounds they're trying to lift or whatever it is. So, of course, they try to make sure their form is good. And they lift and they do that until they fatigue, and then they set the bar down, and then they get up and they walk across the gym in some old, that somehow that threshold of effort, when they fall below, they fall back into their habits. Well, why does their hip problem persist? Okay, well, watch them walk. How much walking do they do? probably a lot more than they do lifting.
Mm,
Why don't they learn to understand their coordination in the walking as well as they understand their coordination in the 90 seconds that they do their military press?
mm,
It's a very practical intervention into your life. And it has applications that, like you said, you really can't apply it anywhere. I'm applying it right now. I'm sitting talking to you. I'm aware of how my pelvis is on the chair I'm sitting on. I'm aware of where my feet are. Again, I'm not driving myself crazy, but it does contribute to my sense of comfort, safety, support.
mm.
And once you learn enough about it, you really it's quite portable. You can apply this stuff standing in line at the bank if you know what
Yeah.
you're doing, right? And most people, they're in a way they're not looking necessarily for another for another gym membership they have to have. They want something that integrates well into their everyday life.
Yeah.
What can I be doing for myself? Is there a way that I can be walking, or a way that I need to change the way I'm sitting? Yes, these are very small changes you need to make. You don't need to make big leaps, but
Mm.
you do need to enter the conversation for sure.
So I wonder if, because we're talking about awareness and sensitivity, I wonder if like you've contrasted it with exercise. I wonder if you could contrast it with meditation as well. So like what's the difference there? Because obviously that's a self-awareness process
It is.
where you're reflecting and you're paying attention to yourself, and that sensitivity mechanism is very much at the forefront, I would say. But I wonder, like, what's the how you would articulate the differences there on that level.
Yeah, well, if exercise is above the threshold of effort, meditation is clearly on the other end of the spectrum
Yeah.
because, I can't account for every style of meditation. There is walking meditation, etc.
Mm,
But for the most part, standard mindfulness meditation, you are going to be sitting fairly still for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever you do.
mm,
Um, but the domain of interest is it might include your breathing, and that's part of what you're doing. But I think the main domain of interest is your mental activity,
mhm,
right? Now, the strategy, maybe not for every type of meditation, but a very basic strategy in meditation is it's not about you trying to do something, right? It's not about like, I've got to think like this. Although some people, of course, get hung up on I'm supposed to experience no thoughts or something like this. But
mm,
of course, the main strategy is learning to observe your experience, but without clinging to it or needing it to be a certain way. And
yeah.
by doing that, you actually learn to observe a certain kind of a blind spot that you have about maybe the way you're caught up in discursive thought all the time. The strategy in meditation is really observational. And usually it's informed by a certain view that the meditation teacher will hopefully guide you towards. Um, but the other way to see that strategy is that meditation is, in a way, it's a kind of a strategy of subtraction. You're interested not in making yourself perform a certain series of thoughts or a certain series of breaths, but in looking for the landscape of activity that seems to just emerge out of your mind while you're meditating and learning to associate some degree of pleasure with the quieter moments. But even in the noisier moments, you're not trying to chase after them or wrestle them to the ground, but to simply watch your own mind. Now, that's really a domain of mental activity. Um, and there's probably a reason that it's easier to have those meditative experiences when you are fairly physically quiet.
Mm,
Movement can be, of course, a distraction for your attention. Try try meditating on the assault bike. It's probably not that easy to do just because of the amount of effort you're putting out.
mm,
I think Feldenkrais actually threads the needle. Awareness through movement really threads the needle because we are using movement, but the whole idea is to quiet everything down so you can actually observe the qualities in movement that
mm,
you usually don't. The smoothness. What's the beginning like? For a lot of people, as they begin a movement, even if they're lying on their side and they're sliding one arm forward, that's a very common lesson that's beginning to a lesson. What people discover is that even when they're given the opportunity to slow down and make the movement as soft, as easy as possible, they can't.
mm,
It's a discovery of actually how fraught their image of how they're sourcing the movement is. And
Mm,
then the lesson, of course, becomes a kind of an unfolding. Sometimes it's kind of an undoing, an unlearning of some of the habits that are rooted in their personality or their history, but they lose their grip through paying attention clearly to them.
mm,
And then through the sort of the structured experiences that are in the lesson. Because that's another powerful part of awareness through movement is that while the we try to stay below the threshold of exertion, the lessons really do offer a structure. There really is a structured learning process that you're taken through in the lesson that has something to do with understanding how a certain pattern is composed and how it can be composed more and more skillfully because you learn what you've left out, what you never knew that you were supposed to put in, and then you get a chance to actually start to compose everything clearer and clearer. So that's really where the learning process comes in. It uses movement, it's about movement and
mm.
attention, but it's in a much calmer container where your actual conception of what you're doing can start to actually flourish and become clearer.
So the structure of the awareness through movement lessons, I mean, from what I understand, there's like over 5,000 different lessons that you could do. Some of them obviously would be similar to each other in theme, but there's a lot of variety within the Feldenkrais method within the awareness through movement lessons.
There is.
Um, One of the things that you mentioned earlier is this kind of like a learning process that a child goes through in relation to walking,
Hmm.
that there's kind of like maybe these like constituent steps that lead the child up to that final act, well, that beginning act of walking, let's say, and
Right.
then there's an improvement process that happens from there. Um, the Feldenkrais method, because I know that Moshe Feldenkrais was very interested in child development and knew, a great deal about that subject. I wonder if you could say something about the relationship between how the Feldenkrais method explores movement in awareness through movement and this sort of like idea of developmental learning.
Hmm. Well, I think most people don't imagine that they can really go back in time. And it's true, you can't. I can't go back to who I was.
Yeah.
But the way your brain works, if you put yourself in the right situation, we can teach you to crawl again. Now, most of us who are adults, we have no reason to crawl. Why would we crawl? Unless we're playing with our grandkids or we're in a improv theater group or something or something like that. But most people, crawling is not, it's something they left behind a long time ago. It's still something you can do though. And more importantly, there's something quite valuable to learn from crawling. And some of the lessons in the awareness through movement repertoire use and exploit crawling to help you understand what better walking actually feels like and moves like. Um, the baby goes through every child that develops more or less normally essentially starts with not enough muscle strength, not enough neurological strength, not enough orientation in the world, and gradually moves from a place of great stability where the mother is the stability, the father is the stability, the floor is the stability. And as they learn to move, they learn to lift the head, they learn to roll over, they learn to roll over and lift their head to look up, they start to pull one knee up the floor, then they get their pelvis up over there, they get up onto hands and knees. They're moving through stages of greater and greater instability. The arrival into upright standing and walking, that's the height of instability for normal human development. And it takes us a while to get there. So the awareness through movement, the repertoire of lessons, one way to think about, because when you tell people there's all these lessons, people just go, who wants 5,000 of anything except dollars maybe. But the when people hear that there's such this big repertoire, the thing to just know about that repertoire is that it really draws on four or five different domains of study, really. One of those domains is child motor development. How human beings actually have to go through these stages of coordination to get to the one we all seem to think is, well, this is normal. I'm standing, I'm sitting, right? And going back through those stages has enormous value because at each one of those stages, you use your vestibular organs as part of the way you make good crawling or smooth rolling or good lunging or rolling over your shoulder or whatever the movement might be. Your sense of balance is so deeply embedded in coordination. And when you slow things down, you give your vestibular system time to order things a lot better for yourself. And the funny thing is, if you spend the 45 minutes in an ATM lesson that's really about crawling, you're going to discover something that improves about your walking afterwards. And most people have this strange experience, or it feels strange, that what in the world just happened? We were crawling and we did this thing with lifting the head and lifting the arm, and it just seems like some exercise that's divorced from this other domain or this other orientation. And yet they get up and they, given time and given the fact that their attention is kind of tuned into all this stuff, they start to notice that the way they stand over their legs feels safer, feels more comfortable, actually feels more lubricated. Right. That's because your brain has been assembling the coordination better. And again, under the threshold of exertion, where the increase in sensitivity is part of what improves you. Um, so the vast repertoire of lessons, it draws on childhood, child motor development for sure, and how different patterns of coordination feed into higher levels of coordination. Feldenkrais was also he studied judo, and he didn't just study judo with the local judo teacher. He met the founder of judo, Jigoro Kano, in Paris in the 30s, and wound up really studying with Kano's top students. Um, and one of the things Feldenkrais, of course, with anybody is going to learn when they study judo is that judo has a lot to do with understanding how balance is taken from your opponent. And how balance is taken is by you moving into a particular relationship with them. And hopefully you move in such a way that even though you're moving, your momentary stability unsettles them. And then you take advantage of the fact that they're unsettled, and then you throw them to the ground, right? And they have all their techniques for doing that. And then there's also grappling on the ground, pinning and arm bars and all sorts of fun stuff like this. But Feldenkrais was absolutely fascinated with the repertoire of judo throws and grappling and lessons, not just because it was personally beneficial for him, but he saw it as a way of understanding the composition of coordination. And I think he really saw it as a domain that really understood. I mean, judo is really it is a learning domain, but it's also a performance domain for sure. He really saw it as a highly developed system of understanding how balance contributes to power and strength.
Mm.
I don't know. Have you ever done martial arts before?
Yeah, I do Tai Chi. Yeah.
You do Tai Chi. Okay.
Mm.
I've done little Tai Chi. I did 2 years of Aikido in college and about a year and a half of judo in college.
Mm.
Um, that's a very interesting experience to be thrown by a high level judo teacher. Mostly because the experience, if it's done well and you're in a kind of you're not with a bunch of murderers, you're really, you're there to learn and people are compassionate in teaching you. The really high quality experience of being thrown doesn't feel violent. It actually feels kind of wonderful.
Mm.
It's almost like you're being picked up by a wave in an ocean and you're just moved. You're really not aware of how this person has simply taken you off the ground and thrown you back down to it.
Mm.
And that for most people, if you've ever experienced that for a lot of people, that's a really elegant experience of power and strength because it doesn't feel like they're trying terribly hard. It just feels really well done. Well,
Mm.
that's because those guys have an extraordinary control of their balance and coordination moment to moment. And Feldenkrais really saw this in judo, but he did the unusual thing, which is he kind of deconstructed a lot of the lessons for himself, and then he began teaching. And a lot of the lessons really that come from the judo repertoire are, of course, also based on how a person transitions over the floor, how they find balance, how their sense of balance contributes to their experience of strength or of clarity in the way they stand and move from moment to moment. So that's another domain that the lessons really draw from. It doesn't mean you're going to be doing judo in awareness through movement classes, but you could, depending on the teacher. The teacher might have some experience. There certainly are. I know martial artists who teach Feldenkrais, and it's a wonderful combination.
So two things occur to me as you kind of go through that process of explaining the relationship or the relevance of judo. One is the kind of the process of balance as it relates to aging and instability and um, the implications of instability as you get older in life. That,
Hmm.
there's a real health um, uh,
Risk.
risk to,
Fall
yeah,
risk is what it's
yeah,
called. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And that something in, this process of dropping below the effort level, going through the learning process again, is something that has a kind of global benefit to people as they get older, where they feel more stable and improve their balance so that they have less risk.
that's
Um,
right.
that's one thought. The other is that you mentioned power, and I think that in the way that we're kind of framing this or like understanding this, that the power isn't through over exertion, it's through skill. So they've somehow arrived at power through being very technically skillful. And
That's
it
right.
feels relaxed, or you said like it feels like a wave. Doesn't feel like they're overly exerting as they're doing this powerful move. There's some like individual refinement that allows them to be extremely powerful, yet
That's right.
incredibly skillful at the same time.
That's right. Somehow they've married sensitivity with
Yeah.
strength,
Yeah.
which is a very, very potent combination.
Mm,
Um, yeah, with older people, where of course the degradation of balance and function is it's getting their attention, of course. Um, a common experience is, of course, you're just doing the best you can. You kind of feel like you're getting older. You laugh about it with your friends. Maybe you take a fall, you're okay, but now you're really worried. Um, and then usually people don't have any kind of clear intervention or clear learning intervention. Instead, they wait until they get injured and then they go to physical therapy or they have surgery or whatever they do. But by then you've got the injury, right? Why not take on the project before things get that far, right? Um, Another interesting experience I've certainly had over the years with older clients, they come and they if the client says, they want to work on their balance, chances are by the time they've gotten to me, they've already seen a bunch of other practitioners of some other intervention,
mm,
and usually they've got some practices that they're doing, right? And many times they will say, well, I'm supposed to do this thing where I stand on one foot and I lift and I try to hold that for a while. And you watch them demonstrate what the exercise is to improve their balance. And it's this, right? They just try to perform the exercise as if it's going to help them.
mm,
And what you see is they don't know what they're doing. They know what they're supposed to do. They don't have any means for understanding how they might shape the activity better so that their neurological sense, their actual sensation of the coordination actually has a chance to improve.
mm,
It's very rare that one person shows, here's how I practice standing on one foot, and they move so slowly that the one foot starts coming away from the floor in a gradual, smooth progression. Most
mm,
people are simply rushing to perform the thing,
mm.
and it's just a bad relationship.
And I
Um,
guess that connects in with most people rushing in general and most injuries or accidents being related to rushing in
most
some,
most of those doctors' visits are 10 minutes or 15
yeah.
minutes, right? It's not a it's not a languid fulsome experience where they're really able to, again, to learn how to compose the
Mm,
coordination. They're just given an exercise that they're supposed to do and hope that it improves them.
mm,
But that's not really waking anything up at all. In fact, it often reinforces the self-image, which is quite negative about the experience of balance.
mm,
And this is another thing about awareness through movement is the container, the ability to stay below the threshold and to learn all of the rich relationships and associations and really run an experiment well.
yeah.
The point is also to enjoy the discovery of how your body can work.
Mm,
And not because you killed yourself trying to trying to do it, but because you actually discover a degree of pleasure, a
mm,
degree of independence, just the joy of discovery of something that you didn't know. When the lessons really go well, when they're structured a certain way, you really can arrive at this kind of revelation of something that oh my God, I had no idea my hip was so important to the turning of my head. I mean, that sounds very basic. It's not. For a lot of people, that is a really exciting thing, especially if there's pleasure associated in the discovery, right?
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like you talk about the moment of a child like coming up to standing and taking their first steps, that there's a
Yeah.
joy in that moment. Like the child's face is surprised almost, like, what am I doing? How did I get here? Like this is interesting and new and different. And I think
Yes.
that is within, like, maybe in smaller pockets, but like within awareness through movement lessons where you're going through a process of self-discovery and it's like, oh, this pain I've had for 5 years, I can feel it in this moment when I do this particular thing. And if I do it like this instead, I don't, it's really,
It's so true. It's the experience of those very kind of moments. It's actually very common in awareness through movement.
yeah,
We own that that kind of moment for people, I think, really
yeah,
well.
mm,
It can be just as joyful and exciting as the child discovering something
yeah,
because of how clear your attention is to the means by which you're resolving it. Like, oh, yeah, you're in this lesson, you've been exploring this pattern, and
mm,
things are starting to get more intelligent. You're starting to be more kind to yourself. You're starting to
mm,
understand while you do. That's a very exciting thing to feel yourself sort of growing in your understanding of the experience.
mm,
Oh, sorry. Um, but the other thing about it is that you actually start to feel that you have access to this kind of source code of your coordination and your
mm,
experience.
yeah,
Um, Now, I'm using that term, it's kind of like the software, but it's like, where are these habits of mine? Where are they written? Well, I don't really have access to the, the neuronal firings in their purest, rawest form.
mm,
I don't. But I do have a way of slowing things down so that one of the things that happens when you slow the movement down enough
mm,
is that you actually arrive, you get away from the experience of always being downstream of what you're trying to do. You're always at the end, just
yeah,
trying to do, and you don't really understand how the experience is being created.
yeah,
When you slow things down enough, a window opens. Your observational skills start to actually match with the pace of the movement. When
mm,
that starts to happen, you start to change what you do. You start to make slightly different choices. And that's kind of what's special about slowing down is that your ability to see the other options in the moment become more possible. When you're going fast or when you're going above the threshold, those moments pass by too quickly. And
mhm,
your brain, very smartly, is only going to choose the reliable known habit. You're not going to invent anything new, right? It's kind of like if I was a pianist, right, and I'm working on my Beethoven concerto. Okay, let's pretend it's not quite ready yet. I've got another 2 months of working on it, let's say. But Joe says, "Why don't you come and let's run it through? It's a party. It's a performance. I want you to come run it through with. I'll play the second piano part for you." Okay. When I'm performing, am I going to be working out a whole bunch of new ways to do it? No. I'm going to be trying to perform it as best I can, but that's not a learning space. It
mhm,
might be a learning experience if it goes well or it goes badly. We talk like that. But when I'm playing it with you, I'm going to be trying to do the best I can. I'm going to be relying neurologically on the habits, the foundational habits that I've laid and the way I've practiced. But I'm not going to experiment and try anything new. That has to happen in a very different container, and that usually happens in the practice room.
Yeah.
So this understanding of how to manipulate the conditions for the way you learn, that's
Mm.
also a very powerful element of ATM.
Mm.
It's just that the culture around us has a lot of has a lot of embedded hidden demands on us.
Mm.
And we're so used to understanding that in exercise there's this value in making an effort, in demonstrating an effort, in fitting in with all the effort that everybody else is making.
Yeah.
That really runs the show psychologically for, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah. I think based on what we've talked about, it's hopefully it's clear to other people as well, but it's clear to me the value of learning as opposed to exercise. And the distinction that you've made here, which is really like that below that exertion level, there's a whole scope of learning and self-exploration that can happen that really can form the benefit of change, form the basis of change, habit change, or improvement of difficulties you have that you don't necessarily get when you're exercising. And there's nothing, again, as you said earlier, that you're not um, contrasting them as one being better than the other. You're just saying that there's a benefit to this um, less effortful approach to learning that allows you to then take things back into exercise or back into movement and be better than you were.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
When I say that it's like the formal practice of refining coordination,
mm,
everybody wants to perform well. I want to perform well. You want to perform well.
yeah.
If you and I go to the gym, even though we're not athletes, I've got my dad bod, whatever it is, I still want, there's still you walk into a public gym or whatever, there's still a party that tries to perform, tries to do your best.
Mm,
That's okay. That's okay. It's
mm,
just that you're not really going to problem solve in that mode. That is not what you're going to be able to do.
mm,
And that doesn't sound very sexy, but what most people need, especially with their aches and pains and their injuries that are nagging and what can I do for myself over the long term? What can I do in the next 10 years? Well,
mm,
you need to learn how to problem solve. And just performing movements, it's not problem solving. You
mm,
could get lucky doing that. There's no doubt about it. But you really need to learn to think differently about how movement works. You
mm,
definitely need a direct experience of what sensing coordination differently feels like. And of course, you need a better experience with time, with taking time to do something.
mm,
Um, because one of the difficult, speed bumps that people have to get over and that people are often confronted with, people who don't have any relationship to practice, it feels kind of new. It can feel kind of onerous, you
yeah.
know. Same way people get frustrated going to the gym, like I just got to do this. Not everybody loves going to the gym. It's
Mm,
fairly
mm,
monotonous and just repetitive, and I got to do 10 of these and 20 of those, and but learning to enjoy sort of the long arc of a practice
mm,
and understanding all of the rich minerals that are in there to mine, so to speak.
mm,
That is part of learning to live better. It's part of learning to grow as a person. It's part of learning to expand your self-image of who you are so that you can leave some of these nagging problems. You can put them in the rearview mirror finally, and
yeah.
you can understand what you're doing to actually get better. That's a very powerful experience.
Yeah, it's like the payoff to spending that time, which isn't necessarily like the sexiest thing to do. It like spending time investigating, paying attention, trying out variations, options. Most people are kind of oriented to the result-based mode where it's like, I want the outcome. This is very much forget the outcome, come back before and be involved in the process and learn within it, and you'll have a better outcome, but you're not necessarily striving in that moment for it.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with people wanting results. They should
Mm,
want results. And we as Feldenkrais teachers, we should be able to give and provide results.
mm,
It's just that the results are one thing. The learning process to get there is another. And you can't simply leap over the learning process. I
yeah.
used to have a piano teacher that said, you can't eat your cake before it's baked. And for some of us, if we've never baked before, well, you should learn how to bake. It's actually quite enjoyable. And if you watch Happy Bakers, they're even though the buns aren't ready yet, or they're just at the dough or the sifting stage, they still know how to enjoy themselves at that stage of the baking. There's no reason why awareness through movement has to be some esoteric unreachable. I can't figure out what it's about, or it's so slow. Those are just superficial resistances to understanding what you're doing.
Mm,
And of course, we have to get better at explaining it and marketing and all the rest. But
mm.
it's a very practical approach to understanding how your coordination works and actually having a direct experience of refining it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. I think we've kind of encompassed everything that we needed to. I wonder if you would like to promote any of the activities that you do, or tell people how they can access you, whether it's in New York or online.
Sure. Myself and my colleagues, Jeff Haller and Roger Russell and we started Feldenkrais First, which is the website. And it's an online community. It's a mobile app. We don't have 5,000 lessons, but we we have over 1,000 lessons for the subscribers to the app. And we also teach live classes on the app. And it's really a sort of a sane, science-based approach to using awareness through movement as a daily practice. A lot of the lessons are actually put together into functional series. And this is really to help people get over that speed bump of understanding. There's an introductory series. The introductory series is called Moving to Understand. Uh, those lessons in that series are really all about understanding the principles of awareness through movement, both the biomechanical principles, but also some of the learning principles in the lesson.
Mhm.
And they're embedded
Great.
in the way those sessions are taught.
Yeah.
There are other series about squatting, about walking, about climbing stairs, about breathing, about the use of the eyes.
Mm.
All of these things are part of the web of relationships, the neurological relationships in coordination. And so this online community we started last year, and it's really growing and thriving now. We're doing a retreat in April in Vermont, so we'll have our first in-person event coming up, which is really exciting.
Great.
Um, but
Maybe we can link to the introductory series that you
sure,
mentioned, so
absolutely.
that people, have a an entry point.
Yeah, there's a free level of subscription that gives you access to a few samples of lessons
Great.
for people that just would like a taste.
Perfect.
Um,
And if people want to contact you directly, what's the best way to do that?
they can reach me through my website, which is bodyofknowledge.me. Um, they can also look me up on Google Maps if you're in New York and you're looking for a Feldenkrais teacher. But I'm happy to answer questions, or if anybody wants to talk about the method, I'm happy to speak to them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. I hope
Thank you,
this has been
Joe.
interesting for people. I feel like we've explored the subject. Um, Hopefully, we've made it clearer as to, what are the constituent elements of awareness through movement. So, yeah, hopefully it's been interesting.
I had
So
a great time.
thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Joe.